Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's series. And I'm really pleased to have a fascinating man. Began his life as the CTO of a startup in India. Then he got snapped up by Microsoft in America, and he worked as director for some 12 years there, or in various roles, until he became finally director. And then he moved on to Google for 3 years as engineering director. And now he's in a really exciting company called Remitly Global, who are based in Seattle, and I have the pleasure of working with them, and particularly working with our guest, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself in a moment. So over to you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Welcome to the Inspiring Leadership podcast, and in this version of it for this particular week. My name is Ankur Sinha. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Remitly Global. Back over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted, and other people said to me that they found you inspiring, but I just love the way that you are with your colleagues on an executive team. There's a lovely mixture of what you and I talked about earlier, humanity, humility, a nice bit of humor, and also a way of helping others and even being challenging to others without making them feel ashamed or embarrassed or wrong, but not being a bystander. Not condoning, like we've seen many people, whether it be in the American political system or in the British political system, when you've got an awful leader, which you haven't in Remitly, you've got a fantastic CEO in Matt and a great co-founder in Josh, but where no one calls out, they all collude, and no one's committed to changing things. But you're someone who's prepared to challenge, but at the same time, it's not about your ego. And I like that very much, which takes me nicely onto your leadership style. We were talking about inspiring leadership, which the whole series is about. For you, what does inspiring leadership mean? What qualities have you seen in people you'd refer to as inspiring leaders, Ankur?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jonathan. And I reflected deeply on that one because it's important to think about what resonates to you as a leader, both as one myself and then like on behalf of the people who you lead. I would say 3 qualities come to mind for me that I think are core to me, and I think core to what I think of inspiring leadership. Authenticity, being yourself, without being too deferential, too humility focused, but being yourself and being able to do what you feel is right. Being resilient, I think being a leader teaches you resilience because you have to go through a lot, both for yourself and on behalf of the people in the organization. And being consistent. Being able to make sure that you do it. The small little things matter, how you drive positivity, how you drive motivation in small little things in daily life matters a lot more, and it remains behind even after the leader is gone. That's why, I think no ego is a big principle of mine as well, but, it's more making sure that, you leave behind what you stand for and people can continue driving the organization even after you're gone.
I like those ones. And in fact, there was one of the leaders I worked with one of the offshoots of Walmart that they owned for a while, but no longer, called Asda in the UK, a big supermarket chain. The HR director, she said that one of the important things they looked upon was TNT, like the explosive. And TNT is tiny noticeable things. A bit like when you're the mayor of New York and you're trying to reduce the number of broken windows. And you go, well, why are you focusing on broken windows? It's crime. But of course, in areas where there's no broken windows, there's less crime. It's a small thing. So TNT, tiny noticeable things, I thought was a great little phrase. I'm very interested in the whole idea of personalizing your life map, the experiences you've had with the peaks and the valleys, and how your parents, and I know your father and I think your brother were, it's a very technological family, but that they really passed on to you your life map, but yet you've added to it and you've put experiences you have, and also you're very, I think you're very quite spiritual as well as quite practical in that what you will and won't do, whether you're reading about the Dalai Lama or other things about this, but things you've added to your life map, which are healthy patterns and other patterns that you took from childhood, which you're choosing to let go of, not serving you anymore in the way you interact. So tell me a bit about your life journey and how you've reframed it and certain events that have shaped you. That would be interesting.
Yeah. I definitely believe in this philosophy. I think, I don't know, it's something that's evolved over time, but I would say the philosophy I stand by is this notion of explore, evolve, and enjoy. So I would say I've always been a curious student. Like I like learning day to day from day-to-day experiences. I try to reflect on my life's happenings and those around me, to see what I can learn. Right. So I think that mentality helps quite a bit. I also try not to judge anyone or anything. So I try to resist judgment as much as I can. And we're already talking about resisting the urge to have ego drive your conversation. So I try to resist ego as much as I can. It's hard, but I think it's helpful. So I would say that's the general philosophy I live by. That's how I've kind of shaped myself over time. I would say in my formative years, obviously deeply influenced by my family. Like you said, you've been a technologically forward family. So I think both my parents and my brother had like deep influence on me. We're a tech family. My father was in tech. My brother was in tech. So that's how I think the initial interest started. I would say my mom has been a big influence on just how I think about life in general. So I think a lot of the compassion comes from there. I would also say like my wife, who's been a partner in crime with me, someone I've worked with and learned from quite a bit. I think she's taught me a lot more about diligence and tenacity than I've learned from many other people. And then we often role play, like, work and life situations between the two of us. So I think it's been, quite a helpful conversation. And I would say I've had the pleasure of having really, really good mentors and managers who have, deeply shaped how I think. I'll mention one name. His name was Kurt Steve, I think, who deeply influenced the approach of leadership I've taken. I would say he taught me this notion of what we call contagious compassion, not just empathy, not just things that you can understand. It's like actually having deep care and compassion for the people and the organizations you lead. And I think that's stayed with me, even after he passed away tragically a few years ago. But that stayed with me, and I leverage that till today.
I'm sorry that he passed, but it sounds like he's left a wonderful legacy, and we'll talk about legacy later on. But stewardship is about leaving things better than you found them, and the seeds that he's planted in you are bearing fruit today. In your life, with all those experiences you had, what about the peak of happiest, proudest moment, and the valley of a darkest, most difficult moment, and what you learned from each of those two?
Yeah. I would say these days my peaks are more smaller but consistent. So it goes back to your example of TNT, tiny noticeable things. So I think these days I feel happiest when I'm able to make a small difference in someone's life. Can be something small, can be something simple. That drives more pride in me than like any of my own achievements. I think that's been an interesting change. I think that's evolved in my life. I would say otherwise in my life, I think my peak has been like getting married. For me, getting married was a big deal. It's a long story. I won't use it here, but I would say what my marriage taught me was that persistence pays off. So keep it at that and let people think about it. But it definitely was like I think my happiest moment, and I think my most proudest moment in that sense would have been I think the birth of my children. I have two children, 6 and 3 right now. I think what that taught me was, life is indeed quite precious and beautiful, and I think we need to cherish it while we can. And that's something I've, tried to hold on to since I've had children in my life. It's been pretty life-changing.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that I've got 4 children, 2 of my own and 2 that Lee brought to the marriage, and it's a real special moment. And of course, at the age of your children, mine are now age 30 to 27. And of course, we've got a couple of grandchildren now, and then that's another area. I think as a grandfather or a grandmother, you can sort of live vicariously through your own children. Look after them. They're coming to stay this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, perhaps even Friday as well. Look after little runarounds and the sort of screaming and all that kind of stuff. Give them a break. But then at the end of that time, you can hand them over and they take them away again, which is rather nice. And it makes you appreciate those things, because there's such a joy. And as a grandfather, you can spend more time not being in such a hurry as you were as a parent to move on. And if they want to stop and have a look at a daisy, that's fine. Let's stop and have a look at a daisy, a bit like you and the learnings you had from the people that you enjoy coaching and mentoring, and how much joy you get from that rather than your own self-achievement. I do agree with you on that. And what about a darkest moment, and what did you learn from that?
I think the one that comes to mind is like, it's a particular date. I can never forget it because it was like that deeply etched into my memory. Let's say it was, the 22nd of Jan 2009. I'll probably give a little bit of context. So I was part of Microsoft. I had moved from Microsoft India to here in the Seattle area. 6 months into a new country, new to leading teams. And then on 22nd of Jan 2009, as some folks might be familiar, Microsoft decided to do its first ever layoffs. Pretty large. I think we had to lay off about 5,000 people. The economy was downturning. We had to make those changes. So essentially what happened to me was like my entire team got laid off. And then like I would say 3 levels of my leadership got laid off. I still am surprised. I don't know why I was left behind, but it was kind of really, really hard, to go through it in the moment, but then also very quickly pivoting from a resilience standpoint and seeing what we could do to help, to people who indeed did not have employment anymore, like in some cases had to like leave the country and go back, to their home countries, and being able to see how we could help. So it was probably, I think, one of the darkest moments of my career in terms of things that I've had to deal with and handle. I would say it taught me 2 things. One, I have this notion of leaders are just one of you. Sometimes we feel like leaders know too much, or we put leaders on a pedestal. I think that taught me that many of the leaders I looked up to and respected didn't have an idea what was happening either. Right. So in some ways, it allowed me to give more grace to my leaders as I worked through different roles, to say, hey, there's just one of you, that they're like you in many different senses. And I think the other thing it taught me was this deep sense of learning on how to be compassionate in hard situations, like just trying to put yourself in the perspective of the other people and seeing how you could do anything, to help, I think was the other thing I learned from it quite a bit.
It's interesting you bring up the area of redundancy, because I'm afraid we probably have another wave of recession coming, like a tsunami, towards us in the coming year or less. And I don't know whether you read Ray Dalio's book, which I found so very interesting. Yeah. The Principles of a Changing World Order, that it will happen to us a number of times, these cycles that he looked at in history, whether it be the Dutch and they being the reserve currency, and the British and the reserve currency, American reserve currency, and next China, and it will become the reserve currency. And that, there's, as we speak right now, Nancy Pelosi, who's deciding to visit Taiwan, which is really very provocative for the Chinese. And yes, it might make people think that she and Joe Biden are stronger, but she's really pulling on the tiger's tail. And China does see Taiwan as their country. It's just a question of time. They look in a completely different perspective. But of course, the Romans used to own Britain. Now, whether the Italians come and take over England again, go, well, look, it used to be ours. We'd like it back again. There's got to be a question of how long do you decide that something was yours and you want it back again? We're seeing this, of course, with Putin and bits of the USSR that he keeps trying to grab back again. And if Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania go, then we really have got problems. But that could happen. That is really very interesting, your perspectives. Thank you for that. Now let's go back from all that you've learned now up to this point. Here you are, the Chief Technology Officer of Remitly Global. What is it? I mean, you were recruited from Google in a fantastic job as the engineering director, and they went, "Come on, we want you to come in and be our Chief Technology Officer." What was it that attracted you to Remitly? Because it had to be very exciting to pull you out of something as world famous as Google. I mean, Remitly's a good company, but what was it that attracted you?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that drove my attention towards Remitly was this resolute focus on the purpose that Remitly has on driving transformation in the lives of immigrants and their families. Our focus is on financial services, but it really is the focus on driving transformations in the lives of immigrants and their families. And I think that resonated quite a bit. I'm a first-gen immigrant myself, so I've gone through that process of immigrating to a new country and seeing the challenges that someone faces. So I think that resonated quite a bit. And what was remarkable about Remitly was it wasn't just the notion that was put on a wall and said, this is our purpose. Like every single individual I spoke to resonated with it authentically. So it goes back to that notion of authenticity. And I think that was probably the number one reason. And number two, I think would be, I think the culture that Matt and team have created is just phenomenal. Like, I think there's so much bonding, there's so much association to, are we driving the right things from a customer standpoint, more so than anything else? So that customer centricity stands out. And I think it was really, I would say, the two primary reasons for me to look at it and say, wow, I want to be part of this mission and I want to, contribute towards it. I think would be, I would say the primary reason why I'm here.
Yeah, well, no, we're very grateful that you are, and you do bring a lot of value at the same time as contributing to, and I'm sure you'll gain from it too. It's a case of give and get. Talking about learning in a new environment, a number of people listening will either be at the stage where they've got children who are about to go launch into business. They're sort of 16 to 18 years old. Looking back at your own experience, and I presume at that age you were still in India,
Right.
what would be a bit of advice you'd give to yourself? This is important, but this doesn't matter. If you went back to the future and you met yourself, but that those bits of advice are still highly relevant to other people listening for their own children.
Yeah, I would say I would go back to this notion of explore, evolve, and enjoy. And I would say, I think when I was in that age group, I wish someone had taught me more about the explore and the enjoy bits quite a bit, because I think I would have probably wanted to spend more time exploring more than I ended up doing in my early career. And I would say I would have definitely wanted to enjoy and cherish the moments a lot more deeply than I did in the early parts of my career. I would say I spend a lot of my time evolving, learning, growing, but I probably would have spent more time exploring, trying out different things, trying out different places, looking at learning from different people, and probably enjoying those moments a lot more, deeply than I did.
I like that one particularly. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at joyful, which is one of Remitly's values, and got them here on my wall. So I believe them that much. There's not many companies where I'd want to have their values on my wall, but I certainly do with Remitly Global. And this idea, and we had a talk about this when we had the offsite together, which you were at recently. And people did say they wanted to make sure, as well as the explore and the evolve, that they wanted to enjoy things more, because you can work so very, very hard and give your life blood, your life energy to an organization, but you don't have so much enjoyment. And you think, well, when I retire, then I'll enjoy myself. And that's way too late. And often people die shortly before retiring or on retiring. So it is that difference between success and happiness, that happiness is the journey. It's not the destination. It's actually every day. It's today. It's you and I having this chat on a podcast, you in Seattle in your morning, me in my evening in London, and having fun. Because people want to be around people who are joyful and that they enjoy things. And I think, looking back on my 60 years of my life, I think I certainly explored, and I know I evolved a lot. I'm continuing to evolve massively, but I do think I could have enjoyed things a bit more. I as a young officer, I was very wild and had a lot of fun in the British Army. But I think as you get responsibilities and you have children and you grow up and you're working with very senior people, you can take yourself a bit too damn seriously. And I think that's a good motto. Don't take yourself too damn serious. No one else is. So don't do it yourself. I love your 3 E's. They're very good. So let's move from those advice to yourself to, let's go and think about what I'd call moments that really made a biggest difference to you, sort of crucible moments, defining moments even. I think I'd use the actual term. I quite like defining moments. What would be a couple that you talk about in that one?
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind for me is I think in this era of, I don't know, corporate ladder growth chasing, there's a lot of people doing that right now. I'll happily self-admit I was one of those people. I've chased my own ladders. I just got to a point where I got what I was striving for from a role, level, title perspective. And I was meant to be happy. I was meant to be proud. I was like, wow, I've made it. I should be happy. But the reality was I wasn't happy and nothing really changed, right? I was like, oh, okay, I got here. Now what do I do? And I was like, I have no idea. So I had no direction. I had no compass, to move forward. It was like, okay, what do I do now? And then, yes, this happiness that I was looking forward to didn't come. It was like, okay, nothing really changed. So I think it really made me think about, one, why did I spend all that time? The sacrifices I made, the trade-offs I made to get there were probably not worth it. So it was really good reflection, and like I probably shouldn't have done those things. And I think it really pivoted the rest of my life and direction forward to be like, the role, the title, the money, the ladder doesn't quite matter. What matters is, are you finding satisfaction? Are you finding a sense of inner belief on what you're trying to drive towards? And if that doesn't happen, it doesn't really like move anything forward. So I think it really helped me stop chasing things and then start owning and living things I wanted to believe in. And that's why, like, I think I pivoted really, really differently from a direction standpoint. And that's what led me to where I am today.
I so love that. And that resonates with, I was giving a talk to Pankaj and the international team. I want to do it next time face to face. I don't find giving a motivational talk by video works so well, because you want to have the interaction, you want to have people laugh and sort of play off people. But I talked about some of the things you've just been talking about, but in a sort of route map, really, of the first thing being, as we talked earlier, about personalizing your life map. And you've talked about this now, about this inner belief and own it, don't chase it. So it's like own your map.
Yep.
and decide what on there that people have given you is not true. And who else can you learn from? That you almost like controls that you can draw down on your own map of things that are quite good to learn from. Because you don't want to learn from everybody. And a lot of the time, the information they're giving you is completely wrong and misleading. So I think the first thing is owning your map. The second one is set your compass with your values. Now, in your case, you have the 15 Remitly values, but we're talking in a moment about starting with MQ with the 8 inspiring leadership principles that are values of what makes high performers. So setting a compass on your map. And then the third one, of all those values, the one that's the most important is following your true north. Of all those values, if you don't follow your true north, and you alluded to it, then we drift. And we got a classic example with Boris Johnson, who had no compass. I mean, like, he was just on the map having a wander around. And that gave us a good example of how not to do things. I know I've got things wrong in my life at times where I haven't been authentic and I haven't been sticking to my true north. And it's a hard lesson. So any thoughts that come from you, the map, the compass, and true north, does that resonate?
Yeah, it definitely resonates. And I think it's important to, like you said, I like your version better than mine, which is own it, don't chase it. Because I think it's important to own your life map and drive the direction and where that journey takes you, because it's not a destination focused concept, it's a journey focused concept.
No, I think I feel another talk coming on. You own it, don't chase it. It's all about that taking accountability, which is a very big word for Remitly: responsibility, personal accountability. What are you going to do about it? Don't collude with everybody else and just take things easy and complain about the environment, cost of living crisis, energy crisis. That's the reason why I'm not doing well. No, commit yourself, fully commit yourself. Don't collude, commit. And you choose. Are you going to collude or are you going to commit? It's your choice. And you can blame anybody else, but actually the ownership's yours.
That's right.
Let's touch on that first one, which is following your true north. And I was very influenced by Bill George. And when I was at Harvard, he wrote a book about discover your true north, I think it was. But it's, the idea of true north has been used very often. And when talking with one of your colleagues, Karina Frasheri, who's just joined from Expedia, she was saying, well, Jonathan, I like this idea of, follow your true north. But where I'm in Argentina, we're following the Southern Star. So, so it's always remember that somebody will see it differently from you, but it's this idea of having something that guides you in all weathers, day and night, misty or clear skies. There's some, I think back to your words, that consistency was so important, which ties with your authenticity and resilience. So true north and what makes you authentic is what we're talking about. You probably got some experiences of time when you drifted off and you forgot to follow true north. How did you get yourself back on, and what did you learn about it?
Yeah, I would say I've drifted a number of times, and I think I continue to drift as I live my life. I think I would say the compass I've followed, I think, is comprising of three aspects that I'll probably talk about, and I'll maybe talk about what happened when I drifted and what I learned from it. So I would say I have three core beliefs that I think are my true north, that helps me drive towards my careers and my life map in that sense. Number one is I genuinely have a belief that like everybody is uniquely special, and then I can learn from everyone in terms of something that they bring, right? So like for me, that inherent curiosity of what can I learn from the individual I'm talking to right now, I think drives my ability to lead with compassion. Because when you have that eye, when you have that inkling to say, what can I learn? I think that care and compassion comes as a natural side effect. So I would say that's been, number one. Number two is a sense of integrity. Like how do you behave when no one's watching helps define like what kind of person you are and what kind of culture you create in the organizations you're going to lead. And the third one we chatted about is indeed consistency. It's a big factor for me, which is it's the small little things done well repeatedly that matter a lot more than the big bang that happens once in a few years. So in some senses, I would say it is going to be compassion and the eye for learning, integrity and consistency as my true north values. I would say when I stop believing that I can learn from someone, I feel like I stop enabling them. So, when I've made those mistakes and I've drifted away from that, I feel like I'm not enabling people, and I've learned to be like, okay, I need to go back and see what are their strengths, what can they provide, what can they drive value in, and I think that's been helpful. I would say when you stop being consistent, people see through it pretty quickly, and they're like, yeah, you're not authentic, you're not being authentic. So I think it shows up quite clearly. And I would say lastly on integrity, I would say it's very easy to lose perspective from other people when you demonstrate lack of integrity. So it's very hard to gain and it's very easy to lose. And I've had that in my life where I've lost the sense of integrity from somebody I was interacting with, and it's very hard to gain back, right? So when you drift, you really have to start afresh and get going again.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And of course, you've created another little saying that if you don't handle your TNT, there's a big bang, as you talked about. You just mentioned the big bang. So I quite like the way you combine those two. It's smartly done. And something else was coming up for me. Yeah, it's this idea that everybody you meet has something to teach you if only you'd listen. And I know it's very easy for us to be quite judgmental about other people. And it's work in progress for me all the time. I partly think I'm doing an interesting course called the Hoffman Institute process. And if you haven't done it and you can spare 7 days of your life, it's big in America. Oh. But I'm going to do it in December. And it takes me back to my childhood and the values that my mother had bringing me up, because my father was killed. And the fact that father was killed and he was in the military, he was a Navy pilot, fast jet pilot. And I was at boarding school at the age of 7 or 8. All have a big influence on who I am today and the values I set, which I took from them. So some people, you might have followed your father and your brother, in your case, and mirrored them. Other people kick back against that and they do exactly the opposite. Someone wants to control them and they want to kick back and they're rebellious. So I think it's very interesting thing about the values you have and the map you were given, saying, here you are, this is your map, take it with you. And you go, yeah, okay, but I'm learning things that don't fit to this map, whether it might be faith or an upbringing, or I'm going to adjust this in light of what I'm learning from people I respect and admire. And so I think not taking things at face value is very powerful. Next one round from MQ, which was the moral question, was PQ, meaning, what gives your life meaning and purpose? And I believe, if I'm right, it's sometimes referred to as Dharma. But really your life journey, your calling, your vocation. Tell me a bit about yours.
Yeah, I would say right now, mine is genuinely being a small part of someone's growth gives me the most satisfaction. So if I can be a part of somebody else's life journey, like we said, right, you get a life map and you get influenced by what you see and what you learn from. So for me, what gives my life meaning and purpose is just being a small part of someone's life. If I can contribute to their growth journey, that's what gives me the most satisfaction. I would say I've evolved to that thinking, like we chatted about earlier. I would say more selfishly, what gives me meaning and purpose is just learning something positive from everyone. I do, like I said, this belief of I can actually, gain some small pieces of, valuable things that I can learn from anybody around me. I think keeps my curiosity satisfied of like, why is somebody behaving this way? What can I learn from it? And I think that drives my inner satisfaction more selfishly. So I think that's another one. And yeah, I do think, what gives my life, am I making a difference in somebody's life? Is that actually what I stand for? And that can be either through the products I build, things that we contribute as far as, what our organizations build, or through, the people you lead, right? Like the teams you build and the people you lead, and be able to say, are you able to create a difference in somebody's life, whether they're your customers or your team?
Yeah, I think that's really good. And from that sense of what gives you meaning and purpose and the way you help other people, we need to look after ourselves as well, which takes us on to health and well-being. The health and well-being of the culture you're going to create, because as part of the executive and as the chief technology officer, there's an awful lot of engineers who look to you for what's the role model of the way to be, and how has he got from then, now, and how did he get there? That's a wonderful part of, if you're a storyteller, you tell them how things were then and now how they are now. So, and therefore they're interested in the journey you made between the two, then, now, and how. 85% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. 85%. And the number isn't much better for the UK and other places around European countries. What's been your learning about HQ, health quotient, both brain health and physical health, which are so intertwined? And what's your tips you'd give to others?
Yeah, I would say on the physical health side, I think I've definitely learned a lot over the course of my life. I think I've been a lot more hit and miss than I would like. Quick story, I was generally healthy till I came to the States, and I definitely let go and became quite unhealthy, obese, I would say. That is when I think I learned my life and fitness lesson of like, it's probably more important to focus on that than anything else. So I ended up like finding time to go, learn about health and fitness, because I didn't really have any, education in that topic, focused on it, became consistent at it. I learned that, not finding time is an excuse. We like to give ourselves this excuse of we're busy, I have better things to do. My learning was when I actually did focus on fitness as a consistent habit and a way of living, I learned that I was able to manage my time better at work. So that led to better time management skills, better focus, being able to focus and prioritize, really, really key in terms of, skills as a leader. And I had better energy. Like when I focus on my own self, I would say I feel better now than I did, I would say, a year ago in the peak of COVID when I had again let go. So I think what I've learned is that consistency is important. And then, if you do find yourself, giving excuses for driving fitness amongst your own self or your teams, try it, because you will learn things that you will actually leverage in your work life a lot more than you think. Yeah. So that's on physical health for sure.
Yeah, I do like that. And it is beholden on leaders like you to set the example of even telling your story then, how it was when you first came to America and let yourself go, and now how you are and how you got between the two, because it's a challenge for so many people. And to know that it's not uncommon. And are you creating a healthy environment, psychologically safe? That's one for the mental health, which I think Remitly works very hard on creating psychological safety, and people share their ideas and they're listened to, they're not talked over. And we talked about the thinking environment before. But also that there may be something that you do as a group of people to raise money for a particular charity, that the Remitly Foundation might be supporting a particular charity, and perhaps can you all, do some cycling activity or something which is quite fun and gets everybody together. But I think it is upon leaders like yourself to actually organize something or have one of your team. I remember when I was with the Scots Guards based in Cyprus, I was appointed by my boss as the officer in charge of showing good form. And showing good form meant you had to do fun things and be a little bit outrageous, but not in a vandalizing way, but just in a fun way, and organize stuff for other people. And I think you should appoint someone as the sort of chief health officer,
that's right,
and get in your team and get them to do some fun activities where you raise money and therefore you're leaving a legacy, particularly if you just only go on to, is it 3rd Street or 4th Street? I forget which one it is, one of the streets in Seattle near your office, where there's just so many people who are drug takers and they're sitting in doorways and they need help. What can be done? Who knows? So I look forward to hearing what you do with that. EQ is next, emotional and social intelligence. I found from very early on discussing with you and going through some of your selection psychometrics, it came across very strongly that you have developed a good level of emotional and social intelligence. You're using your emotions intelligently. Was that always so, or have you learned it from certain people? And what tip would you give to others?
I would say everything you see in front of you or anybody observes is learned. I would say, when I started off, I think I was definitely not the same way as I am today. So a lot of it has been acquired skill, acquired experience, things I've learned over time, making a lot of mistakes and learning from them. I would say things I've learned thus far that I can share in terms of things that I think would help other people. I try really hard to assume good intent always, right? It's always easy to judge. It's very hard to give people that sense of grace and assume that good intent coming. I try to understand the why behind people, if they are saying or doing something that is coming across inappropriately to me. I try to understand the why, which I think is the key to leading the first step. And I think I try to focus on finding points of alignment or points of congruence that you can drive alignment towards and leverage that as a directionality to move forward. Because especially in the area I am with technology and engineering, you rarely can get consensus. You put 10 engineers in a room, we will never agree to the same thing ever. So in some senses, it is important to find what are the points of alignment and move focus towards that to be able to get to a level of congruence, because you will never get consensus. I would say that's my 3 learnings I've had thus far in terms of my evolution.
I think I love that one, and it's so true. And it's always interesting to me when you're working with an organization that's just engineers, you've got your work cut out. And you have to find ways of appealing and understanding what makes them tick. But EQ is such a key part, particularly if you could be with engineers who've got high IQ, but they also have good EQ. Then you're onto a winner. If your organization, Remitly Global, can develop that it's a bit like a language. Just people haven't needed to use it. It's just, I'm going to be rational with you. This is my argument. That's your argument. Here are the facts. I'm right. I've won the argument. What's the problem? But you've lost the war. Which takes me nicely to someone who's moved from India into the American culture, which is quite a melting pot of different cultures, a bit like London, and the UK is the same as well. But sometimes you meet quite a lot of racism. You meet quite a lot of ignorance and arrogance, and people aren't so good at diversity, equality, inclusion, which is something which Remitly is very good at. Always work in progress, but I've really admired the way they handle that. What would be your tips that you'd give on ensuring we've got good, what I call cultural quotient, cultural diversity quotient?
Yeah, I would say one thing that I think helps me quite a bit, and I would say is probably useful for sharing, is never assume that you understand someone else's life story or situation, right? I think a lot of racism, a lot of lack of inclusion, a lot of lack of diversity happens because I think we make assumptions about, I know what this happened, right? I think never assume that you understand someone else's life story or situation. As you learn about it, try to put yourself in their shoes and see how you would react. And then I think some of those reactions will make a lot more sense to you, because you can at least get a very, very limited sense of what their life is about. And I would say be a good student, right? Try to understand and assimilate what different cultures are about. Matt is phenomenal at this. I would call out Matt here, that he's phenomenal at trying to understand different cultures and be able to say, well, okay, how do I then rationalize my own thought process against it? So I'd say being a good student, I would say, is another tip I would provide. I would say in our roles, especially ultimately, I think a lot of our focus is on mitigating biases, just in terms of these examples, but just mitigating biases. We are, programs and structure we can create. So I'll give you an example. If you're, trying to promote somebody into a role that says, I will give this person this role, you do actually look at the rest of your talent pool and say, are you making the right call? Because you could be making a call that's judgment based, that said, I know this person, they're more in my face, I hear them because they're louder. or they're male versus female, and you can make a call. So we actually do try to mitigate bias by saying, can we look at the availability of the talent pool that's available for this role? And then are we indeed making the right call? Is it best for the company to be able to make that call? And it's not, again, it's always work in progress. We're not like, high up there, like in terms of perfection, but I think we're getting better at trying to mitigate bias.
I think you are. And I do encourage other companies to have a look at what Remitly Global is doing in this and the nice mix of different people. But of course, it's always a challenge in any organization. And you just think you're starting to get the balance right of a lovely mix of people. And then different people leave and you go, oh, goodness, we have to rebalance it. And because they leave, then others are affected by it. It's never something you can take for granted. And it's like painting a very long bridge. By the time you get to the one end of it, you have to go back to the beginning and start painting all over again. And it requires a certain amount of resilience, which is something you talked about very early on in your very starting respect for people who are inspiring leaders. And you mentioned Matt Oppenheimer, the CEO at Remitly. It really is an inspiring CEO and inspiring leader. And he has great resilience, and not easy to look after his own fitness and the way he does it, but the patience and the time he has for people, and the fact that he goes and sits in and listens to customer calls with the things that they're complaining about. So he's not losing touch with what's going on. What about you, when Ankur, when you've been flagging? Because there's a lovely link between, not lovely, but it's an important link between health quotient and resilience quotient. Because you can be very resilient and keep going and not having any holidays. And I'm American, I don't take holidays, I'm dead hard. But it will affect your mental and your physical health. And of course, it then affects your family, and the ripples spread out. So what's been your learning about resilience, picking yourself up, and it's linked to health as well?
Yeah, I think it'll go back to something maybe I'll talk about too much in this podcast. I would say my focus on consistency helps me, drive that resilience quotient up. I would say, I think that focus on consistency allows me to be tenacious. It allows me to persist in the face of adversity. I would say as a human being, I'm generally quite confident. So I feel like I can, break complex things into simple things and then start doing them when adversity happens or, even chaos happens. So I find myself, I would say enjoying is probably the wrong word. I find myself positive when there is adversity or chaos, because I feel like I can look at the situation, go back to the model of consistency, creating structure to help navigate me through, and then taking that complex situation, breaking it into small parts and say, what can I do now? What's the starting point? And then how do I go from there? So I think it gives me both directionality and that navigation to say, okay, how do I, go through it and get to a better state? And I think it applies to that health quotient as well. We talked about it in a physical health sense. I'll talk about mental health here, where it has to be consistent, right? I tell actually organizations at Remitly, they'll probably be, hearing from it, probably in another couple of weeks again, which is, it is important to be consistent on taking time off, right? Like just a weekend off doesn't help, just a couple of days here and there doesn't help. Your body, your brain needs, vacation, a week long off or 2 week long off. And we try really hard, even at Remitly, to encourage people to take that time off, because you do need that relaxation. I always say a weekend off is recovery. A week off is a little bit of relaxation and recharging, and you need both. So it's important to pay attention. And the last point I would make is burnout is hard, right? Most people don't realize they're burnt out till they've actually already burnt out. So the consistency in terms of driving focus towards your mental health is important to keep going, because otherwise you don't discover it till you're much later on in that burnout category.
I think you're so right. And this whole thing about not going on until you eventually keel over, but actually identifying it earlier. And often when someone's getting more and more burnt out, they can't see it because they're burnt out. Sure. It needs someone else to go, stop. I'm saying to you, take some time off. Oh, no, but no one can do without me. I'm irreplaceable. Look, I tell you what, when you die, you're not irreplaceable. Everybody is replaceable. Right. Brand. I as you know, with Matt and Josh, just done their 360s some while ago, and 360s are really important. when have you last done a 360 with about 20 or so people, and what did you learn from it? And how did you find the process?
Yeah, I think it was quite phenomenal. I would probably say I last did one a year or so ago. So in some way, it was like good to get that 360 perspective on, what things work well with the peer group I was working with and what things I need to work on. I would say things I learned, it's always good to learn both strengths and areas of growth, because you need to make sure you double down on your strengths and keep doing them again consistently. And then you need to make sure that you're working on your areas of growth and see if they can get better. So for me, I think my strengths at that time were, I think people found me approachable, probably from the construct of wanting to just learn something from someone. I think probably leads to that construct. I think people found me genuinely curious, like in the sense of listening and being able to ask things that would drive the right conversations. And I'd say I think a lot of people found me focused on finding other people's strengths or their special sauce, which I personally feel really happy about that comes up, because like I said, that is a key focus in the roles I play. So I'd like to see that. I would say, I don't know, I've learned very early in my life that lifelong learning is a thing. And, I need to be a constant good student throughout my life. So I would say, I am constantly learning through things that I do terrible at and getting better. And it's important to, let go of some of your, I don't know, judgments and egos around certain things and try something and see if it gets better. Some of the ones that I think I'm learning right now that came up in my last 360 were being better at letting go. And be able to say letting something fail, because I can overdo the keep trying part. I'll keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. So it's important to also have a threshold where you do let go and let something fail. That's something I'm personally trying to do better at. And then I also have a tendency to over explain the why, because I truly believe in understanding the why. So I think when I communicate, I have a tendency to over explain the why, which can lead to challenges. So I'm trying to get better at that as well.
No, you remind me of being better at letting go and allowing failure. It was storming Norman Schwarzkopf, if you can say that after a drink or two, which I don't drink alcohol, but you storming Norman Schwarzkopf. And he said, I'd rather have you fall on your ass in peacetime than in war. Go and have a go and be prepared with the right reasons to go to the point where you might fail. But what have you learned from it? And we were always taught in the military about the after action reviews, what went well, what would make it even better. And I love, I think it's the University of Michigan, where they have a teachable point of view. And that they see failure not as failure, but this is a teachable point of view. And of course, being brought up in IBM, they had the John Watson with his famous story of one of his directors who day 2 came in and said that he had this problem. And he just wanted to tell him about it because it had gone wrong. And he said, did you tell the previous CEO? And he said, no. He said, how long has it been going wrong like this? He said, about 6 months. He said, why didn't you tell him? He said, well, we had a sort of failure is not an option kind of attitude and only good news. And so I couldn't give him good news because I was just trying to sort it out, but it's got worse and worse. And he said, what do you reckon the cost is of this? And he said, I suppose $650,000, which back then in the 50s was an awful lot of money. And the senior vice president said to John Watson, so I suppose you're going to fire me, aren't you? And John went, fire you? Well, why would I fire you? I've just invested $650,000 in your development. Go away, work out the problem, talk with your team, find a solution, come back and brief me on it on Friday. He did. And they made 3.5 million from solving the problem. And he went on to become the CEO after John. Now, if this man had made mistake again after again, and John kept saying, oh, it's a teachable point of view, don't worry, then fool on him. But in this particular case, this guy really was genuinely keen to solve it. And it just warns you, a bit like in Lehman Brothers, which had a failure is not an option. And it meant that they carried on hiding things when it was getting worse and worse because the graphs couldn't lie after the end. That it's not a good culture. Any thoughts that come up from you from that story?
Yeah, I mean, I know you and I have talked about that story in the past. So it definitely resonates quite deeply. I think it's a very hard line on creating that trust and believing in people, which I think was the example you talked about, and then being able to distinguish that from repeated, consistent failure, which you need to performance manage and take action on. So yeah, it definitely resonated quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Okay, well, look, thank you for that. Finally, before we go into executive teams and a book and your top tip, legacy is very important. I know
these results on search.
I know from your earlier conversations, so technology always surprises us, doesn't it? That stewardship, leaving things better than you found them, however long Remitly are going to be lucky to have you. I know you want to leave things better than you found them. So what about your personal legacy and that about business?
Yeah, I would say personal legacy. I just want to know, like, at least when all is said and done, like I wanna go away thinking that I made a difference in someone's life, whether that's my family, that's my friends, or now switching into more of the business sense, like whether they're my customers and my team. So I think just making sure that you can, again, small difference, something that you can hang back on and say, hey, I learned something from this guy. I think would be my general legacy and what I want. Nothing outstanding, just small little difference. I think it's just some of that, some of what I practice today. I hope leaves a legacy in the sense of that people use it, learn from it, and then evolve it. It's very similar to your life map story of you're handed a thing and then you kind of put your own special sauce on it and bring it on, which over time gets amorphous, right? Like it's not associated with you anymore. But it doesn't matter, right? As long as it's driving benefit in somebody's life in the world, that's what really matters, and that's what I'm striving for.
Well, I love your legacy, and I think both. Often it needs to be simple. Don't make it too complicated, and you have. But simple doesn't mean that it's not powerful. Simple, I think it often is more powerful. Sometimes people try and confuse you with lots of stuff, black box and things, and you haven't got a clue what they're talking about. Do you know what? Often they haven't either, as we learned from CDOs and CDO swaps and synthetic CDOs, and no one knew what they were talking about. It was all gobbledygook. Okay, what about executive teams, where when you've tried to create a high-performing team and you found that it's toxic? What's been your way of handling it? What would you advise people from your experience?
Yeah, I would say what I've learned is toxicity is often like misplaced expectations or mismanaged expectations in that sense. If you're driven by mismanaged expectations, lack of clear communication of what needs to happen, or I would say mismanaged talent or potential. So for me, it's either or more of these factors. So for me, when I've seen toxicity in teams, particularly in executive teams, I try to understand the why. So it goes back to simple concepts. Understand the why. I look to structure for help. So I try to find data that I can leverage as signal to say, what can I learn from what is made available to me? And then try to drive insight, which is more intuition based, based on my read on people, because toxicity is a people-centric concept. So in some ways, once I've had the data, I try to derive insight using intuition and my quote unquote judgment on people to understand how we can drive to a better outcome and reduce that toxicity either way, right? Either in terms of coaching and grooming, or by changing the team that work on it.
Yeah, no, it's very good. And we must quickly add to all listeners that we don't mean grooming in the wrong way. We mean bringing them on and mentoring, coaching and mentoring.
That's right.
So I asked you about a favorite book, and I know that you've got 3 or 4. Yeah. So we have just a moment or two for that. So do share your top 4 books that you like and why you'd recommend people listen to them.
Yeah, I'll draw it back to the 3 E's concept of explore, evolve, and enjoy. So I would say my first book recommendation is one that I think has led me to be more joyful and focus on that enjoy a lot more. That book is called The Art of Happiness. This is by the Dalai Lama and Howard Cutler. It really changed my life in terms of how I think about servantile leadership and thinking of others. The other 3 are more focused on the evolve and the explore part of it, and I'll quickly walk through those. The first one's called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Chilani. It definitely is a book that helps you figure out how to drive influence without quote unquote authority, and then how to leverage that to drive results, which I think was quite awesome, and I learned quite a bit from it. I also had the pleasure of learning in a small group session with Marshall Goldsmith. So the book recommendation is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I happened to be part of a small group when he was teaching when he wrote this book, and it was just amazing to learn the constructs and the book teaches you. So I think it was super, super useful. So I will always recommend that one. And I'm a big Simon Sinek fan. So like I am definitely fond of The Infinite Game and Start With Why. So you will see this in the rest of my talk. We talk a lot about the why. So that was good learning as well. So yeah, those are my book recommendations.
Well, they all resonate very strongly for me. Dalai Lama, particularly, I'm going to reread The Art of Happiness. Simon Sinek, yeah, I've always been a big fan, and he also studied the military in my 20 years. You know, Officers Eat Last. It was another one of his books, but Start With Why. And then, like you, I was fortunate enough to be trained by Marshall Goldsmith as a leadership coach. And I spent some weeks with him on and off to become certified in his coaching approach to stakeholder-centered coaching. And he is such a character, large in the life Kentuckian, and but yeah, he's also, he loves that little bit of the sort of Dalai Lama and a bit of Buddhism mixed with a bit of brashness, and I can't quite mix it all up somehow, but he does it in his own style. But that line that someone else said, but he used, and it's very powerful. What got you here will not get you there. And I think this is the lesson for so many of us in our lives, that we carry on doing what we've always done, which is sometimes what we're hired for. They certain qualities, certain patterns that we have, psychological patterns, get us to a certain role. And indeed, our boss sometimes likes us overdoing those, which then become weaknesses, as we've done in the Hogan Development Survey, the dark side. But they're not always good for us. And when we're to do the next level, amplifying that rather darker side of us is not going to be helpful. So I do like that. Right. If you now introduce yourself again, this is a standalone piece, as you know, in the top tip. Introduce yourself and the role you play in the organization you're in, and give us your 2-minute top tip, and we'll wrap up at that stage.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I would say my name is Ankur Sinha. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Remitly Global. My 2-minute top tip for you is explore, evolve, and enjoy the journey, and celebrate the small, consistent wins as you chase your dreams. Don't go at it alone. Take your teams with you and lead with contagious compassion, and focus on what matters most for your people, product, and processes.
That's a lovely tip, and I know it will serve us well. And I'm certainly, your 3 E's I will take away with me and use strongly. Ankur Sinha, thank you very much indeed for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. You have inspired me, and I know you inspire so many others. And good luck in Remitly Global.
Thank you, Jonathan. My pleasure. Take care.